Hello and welcome to a finishing tutorial. This is the second finishing tutorial that I'm doing in a series for these seasonal Union Jack pieces. The first was for the winter one and we made a little flag. I'll put a link below to the video for that if you'd like to see it. Of course, the finishes don't have to be done differently for each season. You might want a series of 4 little flags. Or you might be using an entirely different piece, but you just want to know how you would finish a finished cross-stitch piece like this, how you would take it and use it as the top for a box or for a tin. So this is the box I'm using. This came with a very expensive selection of chocolates that I got at Christmas. You don't need to buy a very expensive box of chocolates, but please don't let me stop you if that's what you want to do. As soon as I saw it, I just thought this is the most beautiful box. I love the colours and I love the patterns around it. I don't want it to say forever pressed at finest chocolates and truffles, although, you know, it's pretty. And I thought it would be a good box for finishing this spring piece because it's got similar colours. They don't look quite as similar on camera. This is much more pink than it's showing for some reason. It's not red at all. And the colours are a really good match for the box. So I thought that would be a good piece to use. If you're looking for boxes or tins, you can often find good things in pound shops or IKEA. Or even in second-hand shops quite often. But do look out for packaging like this that you think that's really pretty. I'd like to keep that and use it for something, but maybe I'd like to personalise it a bit. You don't need to have a particular size of box or tin, but it does obviously need to be bigger than, or at least as big as, your stitched piece. Mine just fits in this direction. So that way it fits in that direction. It's shorter in this direction, so I'll show you what you can do if you want to make it bigger. Of course, your stitch piece doesn't have to cover the whole of the top, and I did think about just doing a piece that would fit in this little blue section, but I wanted to use it for this Union Jack piece, and that does cover quite a lot of the top. I'm not going to cover it the whole size. I'm going to leave a little bit of this pink, bright pink border showing. So that's what we're going to do. Let me show you what you will need. You will need, this is not on the screen, there we go, some cardboard. Cereal box cardboard would be fine for this. This is a little bit thicker than that. I think it was the back of a calendar or something like that. I would not choose to use mount board or foam board for this, and I'll talk to you about that a little bit later. You can, but you will end up with a different sort of look. You'll need just some scrap paper, just ordinary photocopy paper. You'll need a ruler, a pair of scissors, something for pressing. I've got a bone folder that's designed for paper craft. You could just use, you know, the end of a spoon or something. A craft knife, you might not need that depending how thick your cardboard is, and a pencil. Wet glue. This is ordinary PVA glue, which is going to work fine. You could also use tacky glue. I've also got some Gorilla Glue. You don't absolutely need that, but you might want to think about having something a little bit firmer than PVA glue. We are not going to use hot glue. I have concerns about hot glue and the amount of times people use it in finishing. The thing about hot glue is very good at grabbing things quickly. It's not very permanent. Things that are hot glued on can easily drop off a few months later. So if you're making something, you know, for Christmas and you only want to put it up for a week, that's fine. If you're making something you're going to keep in your stash and bring out every year, I would not use hot glue. I just think it's not the right glue for that. And you might also want some masking tape. I've also got, let me just show you, a large heavy book, a pressing mat and an iron. And then I've also got some additional bits of fabric and trim. If your cross stitch piece covers the whole top of your lid or your lid, you may not need anything else, but you may want some ribbon or something to trim it with. And then I've also got some fusible fleece. You could use just iron-on interfacing and that would be fine. I really like Fusible Fleece. It does the job of interfacing, but it also has just a little bit of softness and thickness to it. It's not as thick as normal batting or wadding that you might use. It's not going to be spongy, but it just has a softness to it that I think works really well as a backing for cross-stitch pieces. So I think that's everything that you're going to need. And we're going to start by making a template of the size that we want to make our finished cross-stitch piece into that will stick to the top of our box. So like I say, it could be the whole size of the box, it could be a small section. For mine, it's going to be just smaller than the box itself. And because that's what I want, I think the easiest way for me to, I've forgotten I was storing things in here already. The easiest way for me to get that template is actually to use the base of the box as the template. If you're doing the whole size box, obviously you use the lid itself. And if you're doing something else, then you'll want to measure that. So I'm just going to draw around to create my template. And cut that out. I'm going to try and cut this relatively neatly because it is going to be the piece that you're using to make your finished size of object. Okay, so I've got my template. The first thing I'm going to do is just check it on the top of the box and make sure it's the size that I want it to be. And I think that's about right. I might just cut a little sliver off the length just to make sure, because I do want the pink to show. Yeah, I think that looks fine for what I'm planning. And the other thing I think, well, I was thinking I might want to round the corners, but I'm not sure. The corners of the box lid are not rounded, so I think I'm going to leave it like that. So then I'm going to just compare that with my cross stitch piece, and hopefully you can see it will be at least big enough, and it is, but only just. So I'm not going to have any edge. You can see that if I put it like that, you can see it, the template just comes to the top and the bottom of the stitching. So there's not going to be any border of the Aida that I've stitched this on showing from top to bottom. I don't think I want any therefore showing left to right. So I'm going to measure where that comes to on my template like this. And draw a line. And then I'll know that that section needs to be covered by something else. So that's the size I'm aiming for. I'm now going to cut a piece of fusible interfacing this size. I'm going to cut fabric to be that will cover this size, but obviously it will need a margin to that. And I'm going to iron fusible interfacing onto the back of those. And I'll be back in a second when I've done that. Okay, so I have ironed the fusible fleece onto the back of the stitched piece. I ironed it first. And then, as you can see as well, I've trimmed away. I've probably left about 3/4 of an inch there. That's probably a generous amount. You certainly want more than 1/4 of an inch. 1/2 an inch is probably plenty, but you know, we can trim it down later. I've also taken the sort of end extra piece of the template and ironed fusible interfacing here onto some pink spotted fabric that I think I'm going to work. That works. I don't know if you can see, that's a really good match for the paler pink on the box. So that was pleasing to find that in my stash. And then the other thing I've done is I've just cut out the cardboard version of the template. And again, I'm just going to check that on the box. It's fine this way. I want it a little bit narrower that way. It's always worth checking, even if you think you've been completely accurate, because it's easy to fix now and it'll be really hard to fix later. I am using knife, ruler and cutting mat because I'm really rubbish at cutting with scissors. If you're good at cutting with scissors, you probably don't need to do all of that, because it's not big and it's just a rectangle. But you know, I have the kit and I need to use it. Okay, let's try that again. Hopefully it's not too small. No, perfect. Okay, so it's got that sort of pink border all the way around, which is what I was looking for. So I'm going to put the lid to one side and we're just going to work now on this. What I'm aiming for is a finish that is going to look something like this. So that will fit on that end of the cardboard. This will fit on this end of the cardboard. And then I'm going to put a ribbon between them. And I've got a couple of options. I've got this one, not sure about the spot on spot. And I've got this one, which actually works quite well with the pink of this. I'm not sure how I feel about the lace. I wonder what it would look like the other way around. That I quite like, actually. That might be what we go with. Anyway, so what I want to do is, where are we going to start? We're going to start with the fabric, and I'm going to line up the end of the cardboard piece with the end of my fusible interfacing. I'm not sure you can really see that on there. So that all I've got to fold over is fabric. Now, you might say, Ros, why can't we use hot glue here? I mean, you can. It's your project. I'm not your mum. You do what you want. I'll tell you why I am not using hot glue. Well, I wouldn't use hot glue here anyway, because hot glue is not good at getting flat. And we're going to want this to be as flat as we can on this side so that we can stick it nicely to our box. You could lace it. It would be a bit weird trying to do it this. And if I was going to lace it, what I would have done is sewed, probably I would have machine sewed my stitch piece and the fabric together along that seam, and then I could treat it as one piece and then I could lace it. I'm not going to do that. I am going to glue it, and I'm going to glue it with PVA glue. You can use tacky glue if you've got tacky glue. I just haven't got any in the house at the moment, and PVA will be absolutely fine for this. It may just take a little longer to dry, but it will be a good hold. I don't love gluing fabric, I've got to say. I don't love gluing fabric. I think it's not good in the long term. I know. All the fabric, all the glues you can get these days that are acid free and archival quality, and it's not that I don't believe that. I just think we know that stitching fabric is a really good long-term way of holding it. But for something like this, I'm not going to keep this box forever. It's a nice small finish, but it is not an heirloom finish. So I'm going to let myself be all right with this. Now you can see what I like to do when I'm folding fabric in this sort of way is I like to, I'll show you when I do the next corner as well. We've got a lot more corners to go, so you'll definitely see it. But I like to fold it in diagonally from the corner first. I'm going to do it here, in fact, before I fold that down, and then down the length of the sides. And that way, I think it's easiest to get neat corners. You may want, and this is what I'm doing here, just to put another extra little blob of glue on top of the bit you've folded over, just to make sure there's really good coverage, and then fold it in from the sides as firmly as you can. And this is where something to press with that isn't your fingers I find really helpful. And I'm going to try and get the corners sharper than they are. They're not bad, actually. So this is what you're aiming for at this point. If you're doing a piece where actually it's your box is quite a lot bigger than your stitch piece, and you want fabric trim on all sides, or maybe you want it on both sides, or whatever, you would do this, but you would just repeat it. Or if you're doing it on all sides, I would just cover the whole piece with fabric and treat them really as two separate items. And then you would have a separate piece of cardboard for this, and you would glue that on top of that. Or you could stitch it on top of your trim fabric first and then treat it all as one piece of fabric. But this is how we're going to do this, treating this as two pieces of fabric. Now, because I want this to fit really neatly there, I'm just going to go and press this. So that seam in particular is pressed down. In dressmaking, 90% of the secret to getting a really good finish in your dressmaking is ironing. And I think the same can largely be said of finishing cross-stitch pieces as well, particularly if you're hand sewing or gluing. But also if you're machine sewing, to be honest. So, okay, that's going to go over there. So again, I'm going to turn that over, making sure I can hold... Well, what I want is to make sure this comes over to the edge. Good. Sorry, brief pause and relocation there because my phone battery had run out, so I've had to move it so I can plug it in. Hopefully we can still see everything we need. So I'm making sure that the edge of the stitched piece and the edge of the fusible fleece is exactly on the edge of my cardboard. Now you could, in fact, in this case, because mine fits precisely to the top and bottom, I could iron that over as well, but I think I'm just going to rely on the glue. So we're going to do the same again. Gluing. I should have a bit more glue in here. I should have planned that. 3 sides. Gluing on the cardboard, not the fabric. And then I'm going to pull in the corners first. And use, if you're using Aida like me, but even if you're using linen or even weave, use the fabric grain to help you get a good diagonal on that. And again, press it down really firmly. Yeah, I should have ironed it, that's why that's coming up. It will stick, we'll just need to give it a really good press and keep pressing. And this is what the big heavy book is going to come in useful for, is holding this all down to make sure it's glued really firmly. Okay, so we've done those, and then we're going to just come in finger tight. You don't want to be pulling it so tight you're pulling anything out of shape. I mean, that's unlikely on this Aida because it's fairly stiff. But if you're doing something with linen or even weave, you know, you definitely don't want to be pulling it tightly enough that you're risking anything going out of shape. And you also you'll notice that we've not put any glue anywhere near the front of this piece. Don't glue right up to the edges of the cardboard because it will seep over, and what you don't want is any glue to be showing. So this is where I've got to so far. I'm just going to finagle it a little bit to get it exactly how I want, and then all I'm going to do, take off that loose little end, is I am going to grab some greaseproof paper, put it on top of this so that if there is any glue it won't stick to it, and then put it under a heavy book, and then we'll come back in a bit. So let's have a look. This has been under the book for about half an hour or so, I think. Let's just see how we are getting on. Okay, that seems to be stuck down pretty nicely. And on the front, you can see, hopefully that's got a nice clean line there. It is slightly wonky. Not enough, I think, to worry. Good, so then I'm just going to add, I think I am going to add this trim. I think that gives a nice thing rather than just the obvious line between the two. And again, I'm just going to glue this. This is all about the gluing this time, isn't it? So let's cut a nice neat edge on that and give it a little bit of overlap. And I do really like these little squeezy bottles for putting your glue in. I'm a bad gluer, but these do help get it in the right place and sort of evenly along. So again, and I do find as well, again, I'm not good with gluing. I do find using the bone folder, or at least something, rather than just my fingers, to press it down really makes a difference. So I'm going to cut a little bit more off that end. So a bit of glue there, bit of glue there. So there is glue obviously where I've glued this down on the front. I've tried to make sure it's not on the cross stitch fabric, although, you know, I'm not good at gluing. That may not be absolutely perfect. Good. So let's get the box lid back. Check that that fits. It just fits nicely. There's perhaps not quite as much of the pink edge showing as I might have liked, but also this wasn't going to get any smaller because that's the size of the stitched piece. If I'd had the box before I'd done the stitching, I might have said, oh, let's do that on a higher count. I think this is 18 count, so maybe if I'd done it on 20 count, that would have been better. But anyway, I'm pretty happy with that. I think it looks like it fits with the cover. You're still going to get the nice patterns on the side of the box. You can, of course, do covers which come down over the sides of the box. That is more complicated. It's more complicated in terms of the cutting and gluing, but also you want to make sure that you don't have anything which is changing the size of the inside of your box, because then the box lid may not fit on the bottom of the box. It's easier if you just do the top like this. So all I'm going to do now, you know, this, I don't think you really needed a tutorial for this, but anyway, you're getting one. All I'm going to do now, and for this I am going to use the Gorilla Glue, just because this is really shiny. I want this to be a very firm fix. Everything here is going to get held on again when it's glued down to the box. So this is the bit that really matters. So I'm going to use this Gorilla Glue, which again, I like it in this little box. It's, you know, it's not quite super glue, but it's more or less super glue, but it's just a lot easier to use. Well, I say that. I think I've got a little stoppage problem where I hadn't put the lid on, and now it's glued up inside. So it's just, there we go. Okay, and I'm not worrying about this going right to the edge. It doesn't need to. I am putting it on the fabric bit, and I will put some in the middle here on the cardboard. But I don't want it to go right to the edge. I don't want to risk it seeping out, but also the edges don't need to be. That's why I told you, bad at gluing. Don't drop it with the glue all over it. There we go. And I'm just going to centre it there. And once again, I'm going to get out my trusty heavy book and put that on the top and leave it to dry. And then I'll come back to that in a little bit and hopefully it'll be finished. So I think we're there. Let's take the book off again, turn it over, and actually it's still a little bit longer to dry, but anyway, it will dry and that's what it will look like. So here's the bottom of the box. I can store little floss drops in there, bobbins in there, tangles of threads in there, turns out. Who knew? And it fits perfectly on the top. And I love it. One of the things I really love about this project is how cheap it is and how environmentally friendly it is, by which I mean to say it uses a lot of things that would otherwise have been rubbish. So the box itself was packaging, lovely box, save your lovely boxes. And then for the finish, I used some cardboard that was just, you know, from the back of a calendar, would otherwise have been rubbish. Scrap of fabric, scrap of ribbon. These are things I think that I have purchased in the past, but saved scraps of because they might come in handy. So you can see this is the bit of fabric that I cut up to make that bit. And a normal person might think, that's not worth saving. I mean, you do have to, I am going to encourage you to have a bit more restraint than me. You do not have to save every tiny little scrap of fabric. But also sometimes you only need a little scrap of fabric. Anyway, a little scrap of ribbon. Again, I think this was ribbon that I bought, but save ribbon when it comes in nice packaging. You know, if you buy a posh candle or posh bed linen or anything that comes with a ribbon attached to it, you know, a proper textile ribbon, not just a sort of plastic thing. Because those sorts of ribbons, you may think, well, it's too short. What would I ever do with it? Well, this is what you do with it. You know, you might not even be able to tie a bow with it. It's fine. You don't always need to tie a bow. So, you know, this finish, if you're using an upcycled box, upcycled bit of cardboard, scrap bits of fabric and ribbon, you know, there's nothing there that you're needing to go and purchase. I mean, a bit of glue if you haven't got any, a bit of fusible interfacing if you don't already have that, or ordinary interfacing if that's what you're using. But it's really not about going and buying finishing items. It's about using items you've already got there. I'm going to try and see if I can get you a shot without a huge shadow on it. There we go. So I really like that. I think it works well with the box, and it will be lovely to use. I am going to put the big heavy book back on top of mine for a little bit longer until the glue has fully set. So I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope you enjoy stitching this little Union Jack series. There's winter and spring. There's going to be a summer and autumn one. But also you can see this kind of finish is easy to adapt for any stitch piece, any box, any tin that you want. Thanks so much for watching.